JNU Talks for this carrying on the good part of JNU tradition and JNU common sense of holding public talks so regularly. So what is this issue of common sense that has been going on at least for last few years? I think this struggle and this conflict is itself pretty old. Since 80s, we have been also, I think, teaching as part of our courses this continuous conflict between experts, role of specialized knowledge, and role of procedures, and role of institutions, as against the role of the life world ideas based on lived experiences, life world ideas of taken for granted truths that all of us have in terms of our emotions, in terms of intuition, in terms of our gut feelings, in terms of our perception. So this is a very old conflict that has been going on, and our host referred to Gramsci was one of the earliest political thinkers who gave out a call saying that knowledge cannot be confined to specialized domains like universities and professional academics, but you will have to confront the real world out there that is made of popular opinion. And in fact, it refers to common sense also in terms of popular opinion. That people engage with a sense of reality, with their popular opinions that are part of long-term narratives that come to be settled as if they were to be truths. The right-wing populists today have thrown a challenge to the old type of a liberal normative order. Policy makers, specialized politicians, social elites that who always believe in this specialized knowledge, which believe in some kind of scientificity in terms of a kind of a method, policies based on data collection, enumeration, so on and so forth. So this has also resulted not only in crisis of the old type of liberal politics, but you are also able to see the crisis of social scientists in general all over the world. That social scientists are feeling alienated, are partly feeling irrelevant, because most social scientists work through given methods, very scientific methods. I think only I and Amir are an exception to this. That they have rigorous data sets, they run regression models, and often they reach very banal conclusions after going through a very rigorous method. You will not hardly find anything very creative. So most social elites know that whatever their methodology and objectivity, have often carried their own social positionality, their perceptions born from their social positionalities, from their caste and class backgrounds into the knowledge system. So there was nothing objective about this knowledge system, but it is merely a kind of carryover of their often very banal middle class ideas into social and political theory. So social scientists in general have gone into a crisis, and people rightly are questioning everywhere that what is the relevance of the knowledge produced by academics who have no direct investment in social reality, who have no sense of an urgency, who have no normative concerns, who are not disturbed by what is happening around. You can see that some of the people who are most relaxed these days after authoritarianism are the academics. They go about their life in very regular manner, they have a good life, they drive their cars, go home, have good food, come teach methodology courses, tell you how to reach truth, but you hardly find any sense of urgency. Many of them are not disturbed, they don't feel what is happening to university. Last week, the Vice President of the United States gave a statement saying that we will be unapologetic in terms of our attack on universities, and professors are our enemies. So I think this is the context in which right-wing populism is mobilizing a momentum, is mobilizing a certain kind of a historical moment, that the kind of disillusionment that has happened with policies, disillusionment with exclusions in institutions, disillusionment with the kind of method knowledge that has been produced all through, all of this has not led to any great social transformation, has not led to institutions being radically inclusive. So it is in that context, I think right-wing populists are making the right kind of noise. by saying that, look, this is not going to help, this has helped nobody. So let us mount and privilege and acknowledge common sense that exists among common people, that their perceptions, their everyday feelings, that include their everyday prejudices, and say that let us mount this. And therefore Trump came out and said that his governance is going to be the revolution of the common sense. So he talks about illegal immigrants coming across borders, and he asks a simple question: what do you do with such illegal immigrants? He says you have to throw them out of the country. And he says, why do you say this? He says, this is common sense. You don't need any extra knowledge to arrive at this. So Gramsci also makes this point, saying that common sense is nothing but fragmentary thought processes that exist, that are popular in the popular domain. And therefore Gramsci is one of the early thinkers who raised this very complex question of what is the interface between popular opinion and social transformation. If the everyday forms of thinking are fragmented, they are self-contradictory, people are essentially inconsistent, then how do you mobilize this kind of an opinion, these kind of thought processes for the process of greater social transformation? Of course, Gramsci goes on to make a distinction between common sense and good sense. Good sense, he says, is a more unitary form of thinking that is more systematic, that is also essentially very critical. But he also makes a very perceptive point that the nucleus of good sense is part of common sense. Yeah. That there is an undying creative spirit in common sense that can be harnessed for critical transformative projects. But Gramsci also warns us, in fact very prescient, much ahead of his times, saying that there should be no romanticism of common sense. Yeah. That common sense is not some kind of outreach that is readily available for transformative process. There are creative parts in the everyday experience that people can build, but there can be no romance with this common sense eulogizing, as some of our post-colonial friends do. That everything that comes from lived experience, everything that comes from everyday forms of responses, are not necessarily very subversive. There's a very complex relation to arrive at before we can argue whether they are actually subversive or not. So given that global context, what is happening in the Indian context? And I think it's a very, very complex and intriguing problem as to how one should reach out to this common sense. The common sense, the new common sense that is settling in the Indian context is questioning the old forms of political principles, that all that we understood in the old order. That in 70s, to take a couple of examples, I'll run you through a few examples to explain my case as to why this is complex and how one has to reach it out and one has to turn it around. 70s was a high time of radical left and revolutionary politics. We thought resistance is the most obvious way that one resists. Wherever there is domination, wherever there is exclusion, wherever there are forms of oppression, we readily felt that people would gather into a collective and resist. Today we are witnessing post-1990s that street mobilization has by and large come down. You have episodic eruptions once in a while, like the Occupy Wall Street or the farmers' protest here, but the regular sense of people being idealistic about street mobilization in terms of resisting and questioning powers has generally come down. And one needs to ask this question: why and when did dissent become a sense of privilege? I think today common people in India, essentially Dalit Bahujans, essentially those first generation Dalit Bahujans, urban poor and those moving from rural to urban areas, are raising very pertinent questions. And this is what I call the new common sense in India. That they are calling out protest and dissent not necessarily as something that is idealistic, not something that is necessarily transformative, not something that is necessarily coming from people's firm beliefs. Gramsci would say optimism of the will, not from the will, but it is essentially coming out from a certain social and cultural capital that people hold. So today when Rahul Gandhi walks against this current regime and protests and says he calls out the RSS, taking personal risk, losing his house, his official accommodation, he walks on the streets, he says that he's ready to go to the prison. Generally this would have galvanized common people. They would have idealized him, saying that here is a person who is... But today that is not the situation. Today our people are raising this question that after all, Rahul Gandhi is an elite. Mahesh is standing there. I and Mahesh had this conversation while we were going to field trip. And Mahesh was the one who alerted me. He told me that Rahul Gandhi का तो क्या है, उसका कुछ भी करे उसका position हटेगा नहीं. He is somebody who will always remain privileged. Even if Congress wins zero amount of seats, Rahul Gandhi is not going to lose his presidentship of Congress party. This is the social and cultural capital that elites have, and therefore the protest forms that they are adopting, and that is a challenge even for left groups. Left mobilization is also being called out, that it is being led by socially privileged caste Hindus who have cultural capital, who have social capital, who have something to fall back on. Therefore, you will see most of our radical friends, after the radicalism on campus, go to America. Rest of them go to Munirka. This social divide has continued to exist, and left groups have been facing this stress for last decade or so. That people are raising this question. You come from privileged backgrounds, and therefore you can raise these radical slogans and radical transformation. You can question the authority, because if you are shoved into prisons, there will be someone, your uncle, aunt, who will use your cultural network and pull you out. Some of you, if you have watched this movie Kala of Rajnikant, Kala movie makes this point very interestingly, that between left and Dalit politics, that why Dalit politics and Bahujan politics do not have that ready-made social capital to question and become radically transformative. And therefore the other side of the story has been that the subaltern politics therefore have gradually moved into contextual negotiations. That protest has become the site for the privileged, negotiations have become the site for the subaltern. That they are not in this mood to challenge things, but they feel that there is more sense in terms of pragmatic negotiations, getting basic benefits, getting out of tricky situations, so on and so forth. So today there is a conflict between pragmatism of the common sense and transformative dissent born from social privilege. So if you keenly observe this contest between these two rubrics, then you will know what is the nature of the conflict of the common sense. That in other words, common sense is posing a challenge, is calling out power as it operates, as it is structured, but common sense also limits you in terms of everyday negotiations, pragmatic calculations, immediacy of the situation, getting immediate benefits, getting immediate reliefs, getting compensations. All of this becomes part of your common sense. In fact, our study in Haryana, I and Mahesh went for this fieldwork in Haryana. When all of us sitting in Delhi were quite enthused by farmers' protest. We all thought this is one protest that has really challenged the Modi regime, and it was the only perhaps the protest after Mr. Modi's regime which kind of bent Modi on his knees, where he had to take back the formulas. And we thought this is a fairly radical movement. This is quite revolutionary. They use symbolism of Ambedkar, of Bhagat Singh. They gave quite radical slogans. But after Congress lost Haryana, I thought that I should visit. This is a very interesting test case to know that how come movement, a state that has thrown up such a big, large movement of farm protests, how come Congress lost so badly? One of the early things that we caught, as soon as we landed in Haryana, and I decided that I would only interview farmers or those who come from Dalit and OBC backgrounds. I thought that because the early data showed that Dalits and OBCs kind of voted for the BJP, not for the Congress. And they said in very clear terms, the first thing, in the first house we entered, he said that, sir, कौन 2 साल प्रोटेस्ट पे बैठ सकता है? जिसके पास पैसा हो और जिसके पास समय हो। आप जो सोच रहे हो ये क्रांतिकारी लोग हैं, ये पूरा पैसे वाले लोग हैं, वो जनरेटर भी चला रहे, एसी भी चला रहे। यहाँ हम डेली मजदूरी बिना करे हमारा गुजारा नहीं होता। एंड यू हैव दीज फार्मर्स सिटिंग देयर 2 years, they are coming in tractors, they are running ACs, they are running generators, they have all the time and the money in the world, and therefore they said this is the protest of the rich people to get more protection from the state. Why should we be part of it? So BJP very candidly, very cleverly kind of polarized the rich Jat peasantry, the dominant group, and the subaltern castes and classes. So this is common sense which is calling out what looked very radical, transformative to us from a distance. When you actually go closer, you will feel that that is not the case. And this common sense, this new common sense, I think has percolated at all levels. That today when you call out social activists, 80s, because I'm from Telangana, and Telangana was replete with radical left politics and left movement, and you had a lot of caste Hindus coming from fairly privileged background, giving up their promising careers, becoming full-time activists, some of them getting killed as part of the radical left politics. That was the inspiration. But today if you raise that question, that these were the social activists who sacrificed everything, Dalit Bahujans even in Telangana are raising the question that they could sacrifice because they were privileged. Recently in a conversation in my room, we were talking about, I was telling some of the students, and part of who was Shubhi is here, we were having this conversation with Shubhi, is one radical counter commentator. In my room I said that, I know social activists who gave up everything. I was referring to Dr. Bal Gopal, who was a civil rights activist, very bright, he was at ISI, Indian Statistical Institute here, always a gold medalist, but he always would was poorly dressed. In fact, when he went to negotiate in a truck, lorry strike, the truck drivers mistook him for some wayward guy. They said, "Bade saab ko bhejo, ye kisko bhej diya aapne?" Because he was, disabled. And
told me this story.
So and we always, and he would always, his response. Look at this controversy. His response, Balgopal, when I asked him, why don't you know this is what people are feeling? He said, "I don't want the respect people give seeing my clothes." But when I narrated this, one of my Shubhi Dalit students, she said that, "Sir, but we don't have that privilege. Ambedkar always had to wear two-piece suit. Because we are not confirmed, we are not guaranteed of that dignity that caste Hindus have. Therefore, even if you give up your clothes, you will carry to have that caste-based respect, but we will have to assert it by being well-clothed." So these are the examples I'm running you through to show you how I think new versions of common sense have emerged, which have questioned old forms of transformative politics. That power that was inherent in institutions, policies, notions of subjective agencies, I think all of that is very, very clear. So even if you look at the new education policy, you will find similar strategies of the right. They are asking very basic question that why should everybody get higher education? It doesn't make sense in a society this big, this large as India. So from knowledge-based society, we are gradually moving to skill-based society. They are saying that you should have basic skills. And of course, that skill they are justifying through dignity of labor and vocationalization of education. And we know what is going to happen as a long term, that what this shift from knowledge to skill will do is to reinforce traditional caste-based occupations, and thereby also have the potential to reinforce traditional caste hierarchies. So part of the problem with this questioning of this new common sense is that even as it questions all those old forms of protest, all forms of policy and institution, the social power within it, the flip side of this nature of question is that it generally begins to devalue everything. That you then do not value anything in society. Because everything is constituted by some notion of power. Everything is constituted by some cultural capital. Everything is constituted by some idea of social power. The current context that we are going through historically is precisely this kind of a context where transformation and questioning of power in the registers of common sense is beginning to devalue everything that we know. And therefore that sense of ugliness, the sense of uncivil nature in public interactions. So your professions are being devalued, universities are being run down, doctors are being assaulted, engineers are known to be corrupt. So every known profession in public life today in India, handsomely abetted by the right-wing political mobilization, it furthers this sense of devaluation. So this is the catch with the common sense, that while common sense through lived experiential reality does question registers of power and old normative order, it brings with it this chaos, this breakdown of civic sensibilities, this breakdown of civility. Now one can understand either it as a part of transformative process, or one can understand that this is where the right-wing populists are mounting common sense. Therefore, when they mount common sense, their interest is not in terms of questioning the old social power. Their interest is in terms of this uncivility that is coming along with questioning the old forms of power. You have that Gramscian old statement on the interregnum period, where the old does not die and the new does not, yet to take birth. That is the phase we are going through, where the right-wing populists, by symbolically grafting their politics onto the existing common sense, are looking transformative, are looking because they are the ones who are questioning all that exists. They are the ones who are breaking rule of law. They are the ones who are questioning institutions. They are the ones who are questioning procedures. They are the ones who are questioning the old elite of Khan Market gang. So all this looks quite transformative to common people, because from common sense registers, what right is doing and what common people are feeling through common sense reflections looks very similar. But what the right does is that it is reinforcing and reifying the flip side in the common sense. That this breakdown of civility, which would also mean breakdown of all forms of solidarity. Because in this kind of a thought process, every kind of a solidarity will begin to look like patronage. Every form of interaction will begin to look like patronage and power structures. And right is interested in mounting common sense in terms of furthering this breakdown of trust, solidarity and collectivity, which is inherent, which is one possibility in the way common sense, new common sense is operating when it questions the old liberal order. And therefore the catch is this for progressive transformative forces, that how do you then negotiate? If this is the flip side you have, one way is to completely reject common sense and say, no, this doesn't work, you need a new normative, like most social scientists talk, only in terms of lofty normative ideals. Societies ought to be, your whole entire constitutional language of the ought. That could be one way to negotiate. But a more complex way is that how do we then acknowledge and give this common sense its due place, because after all it is managing to question certain forms of social power which would have perhaps otherwise gone unnoticed. It is from these lived experiences that in the Indian context, for instance, casteless, Dalit Bahujans, rural poor, landless are able to see through social power, the way social power lies, the way it is exercised, which is not otherwise visible. So common sense does help us to kind of highlight points that are otherwise invisibilized. Yet this common sense comes, as Gramsci says, one cannot afford to be romantic about this common sense, is that it comes with this breakdown of forms of trust, breakdown of forms of civility, breakdown of forms of communication, breakdown of all forms of solidarity. My sense of reading the situation is that it is the later part that the right is quite enamored by. That they are able to sense this possibility in this breakdown of the old order, that all forms of solidarity, when they collapse, then I think it only enables a right-wing political mobilization. This is where I like William Reich's book, Mass Psychology of Fascism, where he says that fascists mobilize rebellious emotions and reactionary values. This is precisely what right-wing populist mobilization of common sense is doing. That, Haryana is a test case that where they mobilize rebellious emotions. Sense of that is rebellious, but the values that are instituted within those emotions can be fairly reactionary, because it can then collapse to all forms of solidarity. That's why you see this nature of stress of social conflict that has grown in India in the last 10 years between subcaste groups, between rural and urban, between the north and south, between linguistic groups of Maharashtra and Karnataka. There is no social conflict that does not exist. We have in fact returned back to 70s with the linguistic organization, 60s period. All those social conflicts that had gone dormant have come back, because right through common sense is sharpening those social conflicts, because I think a certain form of solidarity has been questioned by this. So the big challenge for progressives, transformative forces, especially left of center social democratic forces, is that how do we continue to harness what Gramsci calls the creative spirit in this common sense, but do not allow it to collapse into wholesome collapse of solidarity, into complete devaluation of life. I think this leads to new forms of social life world where people feel lonely, people feel left out, people have become aimless, there is a sense of anomie. I don't think I have to tell this to JNU students. You are experiencing your first-hand experience. We have only second-hand experience. Sense of loneliness, anomie. That's why you guys keep troubling us for these talks, because this is the only collective life you have. इसके बाद फिर अकेले अकेले घर चले जाते हो, आपस में बात नहीं करते हो, कोई डिस्कशन नहीं करते हो. रिसर्च स्कॉलर्स में तो खास कर प्रॉब्लम विजिबल है, अपना टॉपिक भी नहीं बताते, बिकॉज दूसरा वाला चोरी कर लेगा हमारा आइडिया. ये जो प्रॉब्लम आपका है, ये कॉमन सेंस का प्रॉब्लम है, ये रिटर्न ऑफ द कॉमन सेंस, दिस लोनलीनेस, दिस लैक ऑफ ट्रस्ट, लैक ऑफ एबिलिटी टू कैरी अ कॉन्वर्सेशन, lack of ability to forge solidarities, it's जबरदस्त visible है JNU में, because it is a transformative place and the transformation will bring these new challenges. So this is a question I am leaving you with, that even as we harness the creative spirit, how do we forge solidarities? How do we forge inter-caste, inter-regional, interlinguistic, inter-class solidarities? What should be that new social form that this solidarity will take, which can also call out the social privileges in old forms of protest and transformation? I think it is at that cusp of historical transformation we are standing. Many of the transformative left-of-center social forces, mainstream political parties, social activists are unable to crack this Da Vinci Code. As long as we don't crack, either we have a normative, ethical, high-bound, high-pedestal critique of the common sense, or you have the right-wing kind of complete degenerative mobilization of everything that is ugly and uncivil in the common sense as being transformative. I think we have a new challenge to pick on in terms of, and that challenge has to begin by reimagining solidarity in its concrete social form. What new social form can it take where it does not give you a sense of patronage, where it does not give you a sense of, that kind of a high-handed feeling, because generally solidarity carries this problem. Many political thinkers, I don't have the time, including Gandhi, I think was one of the political thinkers who reflected on this. Ajay Gudavarthy has a beautiful piece on this, where he talks about Gandhi, what Gandhi was experimenting was with the idea of friendship. That's why political philosophy finally boils down to the idea of friendship. That this new form of social solidarity has to have some family resemble with this idea of friendship. And Gandhian idea of friendship was surrendering without submission, without subordination. Gandhi says that in intimate personal relations, we surrender to the other person, but we do not submit. We are not becoming subordinate to the other person. How do you surrender yourself, your trust, without getting a sense of subordination, without getting a sense of inferiority? I think is the new ethico-political challenge we have, and part of that revolution, I hope, will successfully begin from JNU. Thank you.